For many couples, retirement means the empty nest syndrome is coming as well. But what if that never actually happens? Let's talk about that this week here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts. Welcome into Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts with CPA and personal financial specialist Phil Putney. Now let's get rolling with today's show. Hey everybody, welcome into the podcast. Thanks for hanging out with Phil and myself as we talk investing, finance, and retirement. And Phil, this week we had an email question come in that really posed an interesting question, and I can relate. My sister actually is in a similar situation as this, and you probably have some clients like this as well. So I thought it'd be good to have this conversation of, what if you've got a special needs or some sort of a disability child at home or something like that, and the empty nest thing never really happens, right? So that's a big component of retirement planning, right? Is planning for when the kids are off the payroll, everybody's out of the house. You can really, we've talked many times, it's places where you can sock away more money. You can really make up some ground, and it changes your retirement. But if you've got a loved one at home that's always going to need care, that changes that conversation quite a bit. So let me read you the question, and then we'll get into it. Question was from Steve, and Steve says, my son is an adult, but he's somewhere on the autism spectrum and will probably be living with us the rest of our lives. He has a job, but I don't really see him being able to live alone. How do I factor this into our retirement? And I'll throw my sister, into this equation. Mm-hmm. She has an adult son who's the same age as my daughter, and he'll forever live with them, right? And so, how do you plan for those things? What are some things to start? Where do we start that conversation piece when people need to come in and speak with an advisor?
Well, I mean, it really comes down to the realization of what your retirement looks like, right? Because for that couple, that retirement's going to be different. It's not the sail off into the sunset, all these vacations, doing, travel and bebopping around.
Could be some of that, but
it could be some of that, but you now have this other, a child, a responsibility at home, which, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's not to say, this is a, not as great of a retirement. It's the scenario you're in.
It's a different set of skills and planning required.
Absolutely. And most parents, I mean, they're absolutely happy to do this, and it's their pride and joy. It's their child, right?
Right.
And it would be the same way if it was ours. You look at it totally different,
Mm-hmm.
So, but from a financial planning standpoint, having this scenario does raise some different challenges because you do potentially now have this other financial responsibility to build in. It's not just, what does our budget look like? What is the, our net spendable income, our goals? We also maybe now have this other financial responsibility or not. It depends, right? I don't know. In Steve's scenario, you mentioned his son has a job. Maybe he also has some government benefits. Maybe he's on Social Security or SSDI or something. He has some other revenue coming in, and maybe that's enough to support his financial needs.
Right.
But it's that whole aspect that you have to build in.
And you need to start taking that money into account when budgeting, right? So if we're going to start from the budgeting conversation, okay, great. They're somewhat self-supportive, which is awesome. But then you may have other folks who have a special needs child at home who aren't going to be making any money, right? And so again, you have to factor in, what does this budgeting look like? And you've probably been doing this your whole life, so you've been kind of geared up for this. But from a retirement standpoint, you start looking at different conversation pieces. Maybe downsizing the house is no longer an option or whatever, right?
I mean, now you have this third person, or depending on what your scenario looks like, another person in the household, so you can't necessarily downsize. You still need all the space you have today. If you're planning these vacations and you still want to have a little bit more of an active retirement, is your special needs child going to travel with you?
Or do they require care back at home? Right.
Right. So that's, now you're planning for 3 on a trip versus 2. I mean, that's a much different cost factor, or to your point, if they're going to stay at home, well, do they need care? Do you have to have somebody that's going to come in and help care for them, or are they self-sufficient enough? I mean, there's all these other factors that, there's 2 sides of that equation. There's the emotional side, and you've got to, work through that. But there's also now the financial side from our view that we have to look at to make sure that we understand in this scenario, what effect does that have on the retirement plan? It's another line item that we've got to plan for to know that this is what their retirement looks like. There's these base level for them, but also what are the additional costs that they might have because they're caring for a special needs child, or, if they're doing travel, they've got these other expenses that they might have to help support that child.
Yeah. So you mentioned things earlier. So there's like SSI, you're going to have some government support there potentially, DAC, disabled adult child benefit. So there's some different things out there that you could also, obviously factor in with and this is where, again, talking with your advisor and working with somebody who maybe has some experience in some of this, and kind of bringing all these things into the fold. Now, does this scenario more oftentimes than not require a trust situation? Because, we've been talking about some of the basic stuffs here for while we're here, but what about if this is a special needs where you've passed on? They're going to still need some sort of help or whatever. So is that where maybe a special needs trust comes into play?
Yeah. So, having a special needs child has kind of the two sides, and it affects both sides of that retirement, both your current retirement, right? What is your expenses today? The additional expenses we've been talking about, you might need to plan for, but also what happens if or when you both have passed away, right? Because at some point it's going to happen. So much different scenario if you have a special needs child versus if you don't, and especially if you have a blend. Maybe you have a special needs child and, two other children too that aren't special needs.
My sister's situation, yep.
You have to account for that differently. You have to plan for that special needs child in the event that you pass and there's money left for them.
They talk
much
about
differently than the other two.
For sure. They talk about how, we're going to help take care of our brother when you guys, pass on and stuff. And that's wonderful. And then we've had that same conversation where we talk about saying, hey, I'm going to take care of my wife as we get older, or she's going to take care of me. But that's just not always realistic, right? Life happens. And so, maybe you're, better off doing yourself and your other kids the service of planning these things out that the special needs child might require before, just kind of assuming they're going to handle the responsibility.
Right. Well, so with that in mind, there's a couple of factors to consider. Number one is in this scenario of, with 3 children, 1 special needs, 2 not, should it be an equal 1/3 distribution? Okay. Right. Yeah. The reality is hopefully the other 2 children maybe are financially, self-sustaining and on their own and aren't going to need this assistance in the remainder of their life where the special needs child is. Yeah. Or potentially could be. So should there be a different allocation to that special needs child versus the other kids? Yeah. So that's the first consideration to kind of walk through to see, okay, do we want to plan for that what happens when we're gone? What are the additional expenses now that are going to have to be incurred to, carry on the life expectancy for this child? Because to this point, they've been living in your house. But usually now you've passed, the house gets sold as part of the estate. Well, but now you still have a special needs child that maybe you can't sell that house. Or if you do, what does that scenario look like for them? They still have to have a place to live.
Yeah. Quality of life comes into conversation.
All these other factors that come in. And then if you're leaving money to a special needs child, you don't want to just leave it to them directly like you would the other kids. Right. Because now you get into a scenario, especially if they are on some kind of assistance. Mm-hmm. Most of those assistance programs are need-based. So if you pass away, you've got $1 million and, you leave, you've done the math and said, well, I think it's more fair or equitable to leave half of it to the special needs child because of their needs. Yeah. So you all of a sudden leave $500,000 to them. Well, they're going to lose all their government benefits.
Sure. And do you need a trustee? Do you need an appointee at that point to kind of allocate funds? There's all these factors that come in where you're going to need to set up a special needs trust. And again, I'm not an attorney, but I work with this at a high level, these concepts all the time, but you'll need this special needs trust, which you're going to have a trustee, somebody that oversees and then governs when and how that money gets distributed. But that then shelters this individual from that money, so to speak, from the government benefit standpoint, so that they're not going to lose those. Yeah. Yeah. But now putting on my CPA hat, the tax side of it, that brings on a whole nother twist. Because now if money is left to a trust, like a special needs trust, where the money is going to be retained, that can be a huge tax problem.
because an IRA left to a trust now potentially has to be taken out not in 10 years, but 5. So we've got a much shorter distribution time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And the other downside to it is that if it's being held in a trust and not distributed, which some of it may be, but definitely not all of it, because you're protecting those government benefits, well, now it's going to be taxed at the trust level. And trusts reach the top marginal bracket of 37% at around $15,000 of income.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you've got to be very conscious of, if you have this scenario, you've got a special needs child, you've got a special needs trust, what assets are being left? If you leave an IRA to that trust, I mean, it can be disastrous from a tax standpoint. You can lose 40% of it, because of federal and state taxes. So that's where maybe having a Roth IRA helps, because now they still have to take the distribution, but it's not taxable, and the investments in that trust can be managed in such a way to help minimize the taxes. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when you have this type of a scenario.
The Tax Smart Retiree is your comprehensive guide to mastering tax efficiency for a flourishing retirement. You will find indispensable advice and actionable strategies designed to enhance tax savings, maximize Social Security benefits, protect against market volatility, and develop a customized retirement plan. To get your free ebook, click the link in the show notes of today's episode and download your copy of the Tax Smart Retiree right now.
What about life insurance conversations and just policies or products that life insurance offers? Is there a little bit more of an advantage here looking at some of those? Do they offer some things that could help with some of this stuff? I mean, not only from while you're here, but also after you're gone?
Yeah. So, I mean, like any life insurance planning, right? Generally, life insurance planning for a married couple going into retirement, the discussion is, well, if one of you passes early today, and we look at it like in this laddered 5-year, 10-year, 15-year down the road time frame to figure out what that need would be.
Right.
The goal there is, well, making sure that the surviving spouse still has enough to maintain their life expectancy. And if there is some kind of a legacy goal that they have where they want to leave X amount, well, that's all part of that equation to mathematically come up with how much do we need in life insurance, if any. Same concept here, but the difference now is that need doesn't necessarily end at the second spouse's life. With a special needs child, now you have to build into that, well, what is their life expectancy? What are their needs going to be beyond your life expectancies to come back to determine, do I have enough assets to provide for that? Mm-hmm. Or do I not? And I want to have, or I need some life insurance to be able to pay this tax-free. And that's one of the advantages, right? A tax-free death benefit that could go into this special needs trust. So, I mean, that might be one of the scenarios, like in our, 3 children scenario where there's a special needs trust and 2 that aren't. Well, maybe some of the more retirement type assets are left to the other 2 children, and then you have a life insurance policy that's going to be paid out into that special needs trust, which isn't taxable.
Well, I was going to, can you use
so there's a lot of factors that can play into it. So.
Can you use the life insurance policy to fund the trust? Because a lot of times that's also a little caveat, right? A lot of people will get a trust and they forget to fund it properly. And then it doesn't work. Right. So,
yes. I mean, in that case, special needs trusts typically are not funded today.
Oh, okay. All right.
The whole goal, unless the only time they would be funded today is if that child, the special needs child, had assets already.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, I mean, if they were in a car accident, right? So there are special needs, not because of, in this case, autism, but because of an accident that they were involved in, and there was a settlement, right? So they were paid out. Now you might have a special needs trust already funded with that. That's a different scenario. Like in this scenario, that kind of a special needs trust typically is almost a sub-trust created within the revocable living trust for that child that says, here's the allocation. This goes to that special needs trust. And on life insurance, I mean, that's easy to do. You bypass the main trust and you can name that special needs trust directly as the beneficiary.
Okay.
Or you could name the main trust and then have, paragraphs in there describing, any life insurance proceeds get allocated to that special needs trust. There's a lot of ways to accomplish it.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, if you've got a special needs child, you've been dealing with the situation for many years, and as you're getting closer to retirement, hopefully you've started to kind of put pieces into place. But really, I think in this situation, obviously more than, even just regular retirement, for lack of a better term, you want to make sure you got a team, right? It sounds like, Phil, you really need a financial team. And if I'm not mistaken, special needs situations trust falls under elder law, actually, oddly enough. So elder law attorney.
Yeah, you need a team. And I would say, for those parents that do have a special needs trust, one of the things that I often hear is, well, I just don't think I can ever retire. Don't look at it that way. You've got to run the math, right? Yeah. Your scenario is different than others. That doesn't mean you're not going to be able to retire. Depends on your situation financially, right? We've got clients, 2 or 3 clients actually in this scenario now that we're working with. They're all retired, so it does work. It's just, what does that retirement look like for you?
Yeah, my brother-in-law.
So don't get discouraged with it and think, I'm going to have to work the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Probably not the case. There can be some ways and planning techniques to make this work for you. So
yeah. My brother-in-law was in that same boat. I mean, he just retired this year, but leading up to it took a couple of years of working with some people and convincing him that they were going to be okay if they started taking some steps, right? So, about 3-4 years ago, they had to start kind of putting some steps in place, because he kept fighting it. He kept thinking, no, what's the point? I'm just going to keep working until I drop. And it was like, no, you got to start taking some steps now, just like things that they had done through the years for the house, for safety in the house. And it's no different than that. You just take some planning and some prep. We all love our kids. We all want to do the best we can for them. This is no exception, right? So some proper planning can help. Tough subject, obviously, but one that, people have to deal with. So if you need some help, again, reach out to qualified professionals who also have those resources, as Phil mentioned. He's not an attorney, but he works with people, so he definitely has resources to refer you. Medicare specialists can come into play here. Lots of different things to talk about. So Medicaid as well. So if you got questions, need some help, again, reach out to Phil and his team with the description. In the descriptions below, we got the links to get in contact with him. And start with empathy and work your way from there. Go into planning. And that's going to do it this week for the podcast. Phil, thanks for hanging out and tackling a tough subject. Always appreciate it. We'll catch you guys next time here. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, and of course YouTube. And we'll catch you later here on Phil's Tax Hacks and Other Retirement Facts.
Phil? Investment advisory services offered through AFS Wealth Management. The content of this program is provided for informational purposes only and is not a solicitation or recommendation of any investment strategy. Investments and/or investment strategies involve risk, including the possible loss of principal. There is no assurance that any investment strategy will achieve its objectives.